Hi, welcome to this video. Today we're going to take a look at Michaela's harp. This is going to be a walkthrough more than a playthrough, but I'll play some of the patches as well. So this is a harp library, a Celtic harp. It was recorded with 3 microphones. Actually, it was 2 stereo microphones and a direct input pickup on the instrument. So this library was originally built in Kontakt and released a few years ago. This is a newer, more updated version, remastered samples and some extra samples, and this has been built in highs and is a standalone VST. It doesn't require a player like Kontakt. So let's start by looking at the keyboard layout. So the highlighted keys, the keys in white, they show the playable range of the instrument. Right down at the end here on C0, C#0 and D0 we have 3 key switches, and you can see which one is active by the colour. So let's have a look at what these do. So the first key switch, C0, that just gives you the basic sample set. There are 2 sample sets in this library. We've got the damped sample set, which we'll look at later, and we've got the normal sample set, which is just your regular sustaining strings. That's what we've got now. You can see up here at the top it says normal. So pressing C0 when you're on the normal patch will just give you the normal samples, and they sound a bit like this. So let's move on to C#0. So this is a repetition key switch. So every time you release the key it will re-trigger it. This is great for doing tremolos and fast things. Okay, let's go to the next key switch, that's D0. So a common technique on the Celtic harp is to play triplets, so the same note 3 times in succession, and it doesn't sound like it's just 3 sustained notes. Like if I go back to C0, that's not how it sounds when it's actually played on the real instrument. So what we did, we recorded the musician actually playing 3 notes as a triplet on the instrument, and then in the editing I've split those up into 3 separate samples and they're triggered in a round robin fashion. So while you've got D0 enabled, pressing the same key 3 times will trigger the 3 notes of the triplet. And of course you can do it more slowly or really fast. And it's just more realistic than trying to do that with the normal sustain samples. Of course you don't have to do it with just 1 note. And in practice you're going to use that sparingly mixed in with the normal samples. So something like this. So it's one of those extra techniques that you can just sort of blend in to a piece to add that little bit of extra realism. Okay, so let's have a look at the rest of the interface. We've got the mixer over here on the left. Now this is a big update from the previous version. So 3 mixer strips, we've got close mics, direct input, which is the pickup on the instrument, and we've got the room mics. Now this was recorded in a studio, so the room mics aren't super reverberant. They were just further away than the close mics. Each mixer strip has a delay knob up to 500 milliseconds. So the width control, 100% is as the samples were recorded, 0 is mono, and 200% is really wide. And of course we've got a pan left to right, and the volume fader. You can also click these buttons at the bottom of the channel strips to purge or load the mic positions. So that's useful if you want to save a bit of RAM if you're only using 1 or 2 of the positions. Okay, let's just have a listen to each one. So we'll go to the close mics first. I'll just leave these controls as they are, but we'll bump up the volume a bit there. Let's have a listen to the direct input. And finally the room mic. Like I say, this isn't going to be super roomy, but it's a wider and slightly more reverberant sound than the close mic or the direct input. So that's the 3 mic positions. You can play around with those to taste. I find the direct input is more crisp, has a bit more edge to it. The room has a warmer attack, and the close is kind of sort of in between. I like to use a mix of them, and I usually will play around with the release time and the attack time sliders as well. So speaking of those, let's move on to and have a look. So if I increase the attack time, we're going to get, let's not put it too high actually, let's put it about 500. We're going to lose the attack, which is one of the sort of characteristic elements of the Celtic harp, or any plucked string really, is that attack sound. And we're going to lose that, and it's going to end up being more atmospheric and more synthy. So a much more sort of ethereal sound. It doesn't even sound like a Celtic harp. And with the release, of course, you're going to get a longer sustain when you release the keys. So not a super long release. If we increase that a bit. So we've also got a round robin feature, so if I play the same key multiple times, we'll trigger different samples. And we can of course turn that off via this button on the interface. This version of Michaela's harp has an additional dynamic layer, so we've got 4 recorded dynamic layers. And they're controlled through velocity. You can edit the velocity curve with this table here to adjust the sensitivity. You can add new nodes to this graph just by clicking where there isn't a node and dragging it around, place it where you like. You can delete them by right clicking on them, and you can adjust the curve between them by hovering your mouse over one and using the scroll wheel, and the curve will adjust. So another technique on the Celtic harp is to damp the strings and stop them ringing out to their full extent. So the musician will play something and then just place their hands on the strings, and that will silence them. And that doesn't just sound like the strings are being cut off, you actually get quite a distinct sound. And again, that was something we recorded, and you can trigger that using your sustain pedal. And if you hold the sustain pedal down when you release the keys, it will trigger those damped samples. So if I play now and I don't have my sustain pedal held down, and I'm just going to play a chord and release the keys, and it just gives a normal sustain. If I hold down the sustain pedal and do the same thing, it cuts off the sound and plays those damped samples. Now we only recorded those samples for the sort of mid to lower range of the instrument, because that's where the technique is most commonly used. And the higher samples naturally have a very short decay anyway, so we don't have the samples up there. And this will work for individual samples or chords. All of the knobs and sliders on the interface can be controlled using MIDI CCs. And you can do that by right clicking on a control, clicking Learn MIDI CC, and then moving a controller. So I'm controlling the delay of the close mic position with my mod wheel. And you can remove that by right clicking on the control again and selecting Remove CC1, or whatever CC you've assigned. Another great thing about these controls, the knobs and sliders, you can move them with the mouse, you can move them with MIDI CC as we've discovered. You can also set the value by holding shift and clicking on them and typing in a specific value, then hitting enter. You can reset them to their default value by double clicking. If you hold Control on your keyboard or Command on a Mac while moving one of these controls, you'll get much finer control. Most of these can also be accessed using host automation. Okay, let's have a quick look at the settings panel. So you can see I'm at 200% zoomed in on the interface at the moment, and the settings that appear here will vary depending on if you're running this as a standalone application or as a plugin. So you can see some of these controls aren't available because I'm in the plugin version. If at any time after you install the instrument and set it up, you move the samples to another location, another hard drive or another directory, when you next open the instrument, you won't get any sound out of it. So you'll have to go into the settings and click this button, change sample folder location, and select a new location for the samples. And that will redirect the samples folder so the instrument will be able to find the samples the next time you use it. You can filter the MIDI channels the instrument responds to. This is more useful in the standalone version, but sometimes also useful in the plugin. In the MIDI Automation tab, you can see which CCs have been assigned. Currently there are none assigned, so let's assign one. I'm going to set the delay to be controlled by my mod wheel again. And we'll go back to settings, and now in the MIDI Automation we can see that CC1 is set to control the close delay. We can also invert the value if we want. We can change the minimum value it will be set to and the maximum. So now my mod wheel will only move the delay knob between these two values, 147.73 and 272.73. So let's have a look at that. So now my mod wheel doesn't give me the full range of values. And that's quite good if you're wanting to just control a specific range. You can also delete assignments here, just click on it and hit delete on your keyboard, and that will remove it. So that's the same as right clicking on the knob and selecting remove CC. And we have an about panel with a bit of information about the instrument. The most important thing being the version number, which if you're ever requiring any assistance with the instrument, you'll need to let me know which version you're using. Okay, and then finally we've got the preset browser. So you can see at the top it says normal here, so this is just the normal sustain patch. If we go to presets on the left, we've got the two sample sets. So normally when the musician plays the instrument, the string that she plucks vibrates, as well as the surrounding strings to some degree. So that's what we've got in the sustained sample set. With the damp sample set, we muted the surrounding strings just by hand damping them, so it's a slightly less resonant sound. So it's not the same as the damp samples when we release a key and hold down the sustain pedal. Those are stopped strings. These are just the strings around the plucked string being damped. So a slightly less resonant sound, and selecting the damped preset over here on the right will give you just the damped samples as they were recorded. So the musician is muting the strings around the string being plucked. So again, less resonant, a more rounded attack. So back to the preset browser. So those are the two sample sets, and here are the presets for those sample sets. And you can click through them and try them out. I've tried to give them somewhat descriptive names, but you can always rename them. You can use these buttons here to go through the different presets. If you particularly like a preset, you can favourite it by clicking the star button next to it. And then when you click the big star up here, you'll see just those favourites. You can search for presets if you know the name of one. If you want to add your own presets, just hit the add button and put a name for your preset. And that will save the state of all the controls on the interface. And bear in mind that whichever sample set you loaded, either the damped or the sustained, that's what's going to be saved with the preset that you add. If If you want to rename a preset, just load it up and then hit rename, and you can type in a new name, or you can delete the preset. If you made changes to a preset, you can save them by clicking Save Preset. And to close the preset browser, just click the instrument button down here. Okay, that's about it for this video. Thank you very much for joining me. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below the video on YouTube or send me a message through librawave.com. I'll put a link in the video description to where you can find this library, and there will be some more videos available of Michaela's harp being used in actual pieces of music and not just me mashing away on the piano. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time.